Thank you very much. A warm welcome to the ladies' Parsha Shiur.
I'll get it. I'll get it. Oh, don't pick any more stuff.
Just trying to, okay, just checking the volume and whatever. Hopefully everything is all right. So we are on page 1040, as I say, 1040. Okay. So let us discuss one of the. Oh, hello, Lynn.
Hi.
How are you?
Sorry,
No, we literally we're just starting. We're just wondering. Here's a question for you. Usually in this parsha, we have a question of usually asking what the name of the parsha. What's the name of the parsha? Why the name of the parsha? Right. Last week we had a field trip. You remember, because the parsha was called Balak, who was a very naughty boy, but this week, of course, you don't need the idea of Pinchas to have the name Pinchas. Oh, very, very good, wonderful. He's a great guy. Somebody's just trying to come in here.
Is Anne coming?
10:41. No, Anne is.
No, she's not coming. If Anne is not here by 11 o'clock sharp, she will not be. Okay,
she's recovering from the virus.
How are you, Madame? Miss Madame Coleman has just joined. Okay, so I want to ask a different question rather than the name of the Sedra. Let's just make an interesting observation. The story of Pinchas actually happened in last week's Parsha, at the end of Balak. Yes? Yeah. And this week's Parsha, what does it deal with? It deals with the reward. The reward of Pinchas. Page 1040, 1040. Well, it's a bit strange, isn't it? Why don't we have it all in one parsha? I mean, in theory, you could have taken the end of last week's parsha and put it on only a few verses. Yes, and then you put it all together. Now, this question is asked by a very wonderful French sage called Rabbi Moshe of Kushi. You ever heard of Rabbi Moshe of Kushi?
No.
There is a place called Kushi, yeah? Kushi, yeah. Coucy. She's looking at me like I'm crazy. Well, I don't know. But the truth is, Rashi also is French, and he quotes it. Moshe of Kushi.
Maybe you pronounce it wrong. Coucy. Come on, how would you pronounce it?
Kusi? Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Okay, Moshe of Kusi. But either way, we're not okay. Anyway, he was I think he was a contemporary of Rashi, or possibly before. And he asked this question: why does the Torah split up the story of Pinchas and talk about the reward of Pinchas in this week's parsha, as opposed to putting it all in one parsha, either the parsha before or this parsha, or this parsha? You can always cut and paste, as we like to say. You don't know. Well, that's why. Well, it's a good thing you don't know, because otherwise I'd have to go out. But then again, I am.
It's not a question that jumps at you.
It's not a question that jumps at you.
Now this is the reward.
Yeah, but not Rashi's questions are.
No, actually, this is not a question from Rashi.
Oh, okay.
This is a question of Moshe of Kusi.
Not all questions.
It's not.
Are what?
You're right. Actually, it's not. It's not an intuitive question, but it is interesting, isn't it? Nevertheless, I think it is interesting that. I think it is an interesting question, nevertheless, even if it doesn't jump out at you.
Yeah.
So he says like this: what are we talking about here? We're talking about an event of how should we say, very dramatic experience. We're talking about what we call in English zealousness.
Yeah.
Zealousness.
What is that?
Well, what is it?
It's like very keen. Yeah, very overly keen.
Oh, right.
Overly keen.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it's jealousy of anger, isn't it? Is that
Well, zealousness normally is associated with some sort of religious.
Yeah.
I mean, normally something very, sort of very passionate.
Yeah, like,
very passionate, ardently,
like our own sons.
on behalf of.
Right.
I'm not sure that is it's associated with the idea of Hashem's covered, Hashem's respect, right? Because we know what happened in last week's Parsha was that the Jewish people were unfortunately they were guilty of dealing of being immoral with the ladies of Midian, the Midianite women, the Moabitess women who had seduced the young men, and it was a sort of a mixture of idolatry and immorality. Okay, and they had actually succumbed, a lot of them, and there was a whole plague, and 22,000 people died, and it was a very unpleasant situation until our friend Pinchas. What he did was, I call it what he did. What I call it a citizen's execution. You've heard of a citizen's arrest, right? So he killed Zimri, who was in the act with Cosby, who was the daughter. He was one of the princes, the Midianite princes. Okay, and it was only like in front of like all the people. It was a very public event, and he was trying to sort of say, because it was very incredibly, ultimately a very chutzpah thing, because Moshe himself was married to a Midianite woman. Who was Midian? Who was his wife? Zipporah, and of course, it was daughter of Yisro, and Yisro, of course, lived in Midian, and so therefore she was a Midianite woman. So of course, this Zimri came along to Moshe and said, "Were you allowed to marry her? Are you really allowed to marry her if she's a Midianite? Well, guess what? She's a Midianite woman. This is Midianite. I'm going to marry her. She's my wife, right? And if it's good enough for you, it's good enough for me." Okay, and then he decided to, right? So this was a whole thing, and of course, the whole thing is a Baba Misa because she converted, of course, way before anyway. She converted as part of Tzipporah, became part of the Jewish people. The Jewish people can write this, so she was Jewish. It wasn't, but anyway, this was his thing. So Pinchas said to Moshe, "Look, he's doing something terrible in front of everybody. One is allowed if one's really sufficiently outraged enough, and to act summarily and do what did I say, a citizen's execution." Yes, okay, and Moshe said, "Well, famous words. He who reads the letter should carry out what the letter says. It's your call. Don't ask me because it's not something I can give a psak. You know what a psak is? A religious decision. I can't tell you, yes, you should go and execute the guy. We don't do that in Judaism. Yeah? If you're going to arrest somebody, then you take them to their bin, you bring them to a court, you bring them to the court, you have a base thing, you have a court, right? You don't just go out and kill somebody, right? But if somebody feels angry enough, outraged enough, spontaneous when the person is in the act of doing it, then he is allowed to kill, right? Now then, so this is what he was doing on behalf of the kavod, the honor of Hashem, because he knew this was an outrageous thing. That was a chilul Hashem, it was a terrible chilul Hashem. And if he would get away with it, of course, and people would die, on the spot. So what he did was, he did what he had, he did what he did, okay? And that is an act of zealousness. That was if you like, the ultimate act of zealousness. When you're so on fire and you're so outraged that you stop something, you want to stop something that is, Now, here's the problem. When somebody is zealous and when somebody is outraged, it's a little bit hard to tell initially if the outrage, the zealousness is pure, if it is holy, and if the person doing it is a mensch, is a decent person, or is he just what you'd say in Yiddish, avil dachaya, like he's just a wild, hot-headed mashugana. Yeah, you might think, or even if he's not a mashugana, that's his characteristic. He's a bit of a tough, aggressive, cruel kind of a personality, and sometimes it takes a bit of time. It takes a bit of time to figure out if the guy actually is a mensch. Does he treat people nicely? Is he kind? Is he respectful? Does he treat other people well? Okay. Only once you figured out that he is actually a just, a kind, a decent, a respectful person, then you can say retroactively that the zealousness that he had at that time was a kosher zealousness, and it wasn't just because of his personality, and it was just So that's why the Torah, this is what Moshe Kusi says, that it puts it over two sedras to give us an idea and to teach us that we had to wait a bit to see if what Pinchas did was kosher or not, or it was just that was his temperament, that was his personality. Yes, we sometimes. I mean, I know people. I've seen people who are very, rah. They raise the flag. Yeah, but you see that's who they are. They just love. They're a bit bullies. They're actually bullies, and they use religion to bully other people. Yeah, that is. No, I'm talking about you. I'm not talking about. Unfortunately, I know I'm talking about Jews. Sometimes sometimes people are a little bit, shall we say, a little bit OTT, if you know what I mean, right? In terms of their zealousness, and they're not necessarily respectful, pleasant, decent, kind of people.
So his choice, what he did,
Yes.
Pinchas, was not it wasn't impulsive.
Well, it was impulsive in the sense that it was spontaneous.
Yeah, no, I'm just thinking because it was brought between two parshas. I mean,
Okay, but he went to Moshe. But in other words, Moshe was what he did. He didn't actually ask the question. What he said was, Moshe, he says, I mean, at the end of the day, I know that you taught us. I remember you teaching us that if somebody is involved in an immoral act, yes, and this is the ultimate act, if they're worshipping idols, or in the act of killing somebody, or the act of committing adultery, either right in the middle of doing an immoral act, then somebody who is kanoi, a zealous person, can literally take summary justice on the spot, right? Now, you want to call that impulsive? That is impulsive. You say spontaneous, outrageous. Because if you come along and ask it all, hey, Rabbi, this chap is doing something very not nice. Is it okay if I go and kill him? No, I'm sorry, we cannot say that. We cannot, the Rav cannot say no, go and kill it. It has to be a spontaneous within oneself. So if you want to call it impulsive, it is the ultimate impulsive behavior. But it's not impulsive because some people are impulsive because they're impulsive because of their own animalistic desires. People are addicted to various certain things. They're impulsive. They just do that. I want this. I want this. I want to do. I don't. You know what I'm saying? But they just do things without. They can't control themselves. They can't think. They can't control. Yeah. But this was an impulse. But it was because there was a religious crime. This was a crime against Hashem. It was a crime against the Jewish people. It was a crime against decency, of morality. So the impulse, it wasn't impulsive, like a personal impulsive. It was on behalf of the people of the nation. Do you understand?
But I'm hearing what you're saying, but you can also say, if he was so fired up,
Yes.
could he think rationally?
Could you think rationally?
Yeah.
Well, you see, you're right. There's different kinds of. Normally, we are supposed to be rational, and that's the whole point. That is really the point. That rationally speaking, if you're coming to ask a shaila, yes, a question, well, all of a sudden that is now within the realms of rationality, and then there's you have to weigh this up, weigh that up, yes. Then you would say, okay, no, we're going to have to arrest the chap, we have to bring the beis din, we have to have witnesses, we have to have a warning, we have to have a trial, all that stuff. That's fine. That's the normal. But sometimes, occasionally, there is room for something that transcends rationality, because something is so outrageous that, that you have to go beyond. If somebody's chasing something to kill them, right? Or there's a fire going on and people may die. So what are you going to do? Go call the rabbi. Rabbi, excuse me, there's the fire going on next door, and there are some people in there next door. So am I okay? Is it allowed? If I go and in there, open the door, I might be fanning the flames, blah, 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 right? There's a certain logic there, right? But sometimes you say, look, put out the fires, don't ask any questions, just get on with it, right? You'll ask the questions later, right? And you could say somewhat similar here. I mean, you could say it's Pikuach Nefesh in a way because people were dying from the plague, right? That's one thing. Plus, in addition, it was a moral outrage. And a moral outrage is like sometimes, if you like, we have fire, we smell fire. Sometimes you have to fight with fire. Okay. But after it became clear that this was not a personal thing that Pinchas did just because that was his personality. No. Although, of course, people did try to say, oh, look at this guy, look at this cruel, nasty piece of work. But he cut down the leader of a tribe. What kind of and now we know where he comes from. We'll get to this in a minute. He comes from, who was his Zayda? Who was his grandfather? No. Well, that was his paternal Zayda.
Right.
Who was his maternal Zayda? Who was Aaron's Mechutin, would you believe? Yisro. Yisro was his Mechutin.
Yeah.
Okay, it's quite clear how and why, but okay, he was his Mechutin. So they were saying, you know this guy, Yisro, he used to fatten up calves for idolatry. We seem cruel, what a cruel so-and-so. So his grandson, just like, a chip off the old block, via the mother, right? Cruel so-and-so. That's what people are trying to say, right? But we'll get to that in a minute. But it became clear that really he was just doing this for the glory of God, to save people, and therefore he was given this fantastic reward. What was the reward he was given? What was the reward he was given? Hashem said,
to come back as a
no. Oh, well, that's maybe a midget. Pinchas Eliyahu, it's true. But I'm talking about in the simple, here in the pasuk. If you look at, it says, look at verse your base. Lochen emer hinei nosin la esbrisi shalom. I am going to give him my special covenant of shalom. Next verse, he will be him and his seeds after bris kurunas olam. He will become a priest, just like the rest of the Kohanim, tachas eshkina lekop, because he atoned for his father, for his God. In other words, he went beyond the call of duty. Right, that was beyond the call of duty. He didn't have to do that. And that's why if somebody asks you to do it, can you? You don't tell him he can do it. So he was very brave in a way, and he went beyond the call of duty. And he did something that is counterintuitive to the priesthood. The priesthood, Aaron was Ish Chesed, he's a nice guy, kind guy, whatever. And yet, Hashem said, I'm going to make you a priest as well, a Kohen as well. Right? Now, of course, you may ask a question. If his grandfather was Aaron, his father was Elazar, Pinchas ben Elazar, and Elazar was the son of Aaron, so how come he's not already a Kohen? You know the famous story? You know the famous joke, the famous story about the guy who comes along to a rabbi, maybe he was a reform rabbi, I don't know. He says, Rabbi says, I want to become a Kohen. So the rabbi says, become a Kohen. What do you become a Kohen? Just become a Kohen. He says, Rabbi, I have a check for $50,000 for the synagogue if you make me a Kohen. So the rabbi says, meet me here Tuesday night, 12 o'clock, midnight. So he came 12 o'clock at night, and he comes, the rabbi takes out a Sefer Torah, and he tells him to go around the bimah seven times, whatever, and then he opens the Torah and he starts reading, Yivarecha Hashem Yishmerecha. Well, he does a whole sort of geschäft, right? And then he says, okay, he says, now you're a Kohen. He says, oh, Rabbi, thank you so much, thank you. And he said, and as promised, here's the check. You can check $50,000. So the rabbi says, Michael, he says, I hope you don't mind me asking, but why was it so important for you to be a Kohen? So Michael turns to his rabbi, he said, look, I'll tell you the truth. He said, my father was a Kohen, my grandfather was a Kohen. It was only right that I should also be a Kohen. right? So some people they pay through the notes. They've got it, you know what I'm saying? So, but the truth is, Pinchas was not a Cohen originally. How is that?
Why was he like?
Why was he singled out?
Yeah.
Of all the people, you got Aaron the Cohen, Elazar, all his children, all of Aaron's children, and not Pinchas. He was apparently the only one.
Is it something to do with his mother?
No, nothing to his mother. It's based on a verse back in, I think, in Exodus, in Shmos, where it says, when Hashem said, Hashem is going to give the priesthood to Aaron. He said, I'm going to give now the priesthood to you, Aaron. You're going to be Kohen. Instead of the firstborn, you remember the firstborn?
Yeah.
We're going to be the Kohanim. They sinned with the golden calf.
It's in the first verses.
So yes, the first Rashi explains this. That I'm now going to give you the priesthood, you and your children, and all your children who will be born from now on. So here's you, your children, which was Elazar and Nadav and Abihu, right? And any children born after. He was born already. Pinchas was already alive. He was when this decree was said. So therefore, he was kind of left out. He was not part of the Cheshbon. He wasn't part of that plan officially, which is very interesting. I always like to say I think he probably felt rather. I think he felt rather sad. Of course, I only speculate that when he heard of the whole idea of that his son, his father. We'll wait eventually. That when he heard that his father and his grandfathers were priests and he was left out, my guess is he probably felt a bit disappointed. But you don't read that anyway. I'm just saying it would go if he was a normal kind of a guy, he'd probably feel a bit sad that he's not part of the priesthood. So in other words, his children, he gets married and has children, they will not be Kahana. Do you understand? But now suddenly Hashem says, right, what you are now, I'm now co-opting you into the priestly class. We are now making you an honorary priest. Yes, you weren't born to Aaron, you weren't born to, but because you went beyond the call of duty, yes, I am also, Hashem says, I'm going beyond the call of duty, and I'm going to make you a priest, okay? And then and all his children afterwards. So he joined the club, Baruch Hashem, as a result
So
of that.
when is that so-called decree or whatever you want to call it include the people that were living, that were offspring?
That's why
It's just a
these things
matter
are
of
decrees.
words that were left out.
Well, Hashem doesn't make
No,
mistakes.
I know. I'm just saying that.
No, I don't know. I do not know.
It makes sense.
Your children, meaning existing children, and your children to be born.
No, it doesn't
Yeah.
sound like the existing ones.
No, but the question is, I guess the question is, why couldn't Hashem could have just said your children and your grandchildren, yes,
Yeah.
and everybody else who's going to be born. I guess that's. I guess that. I'm sorry.
He'd have had to be anointed with them at the same time, wouldn't
Yeah, and what would that hurt?
he? Because
What would that hurt?
he might have been a tiny little boy.
Well, so what?
You know?
So what? Tiny little boys grow up to be big men. I mean, a Cohen is born as a baby.
Yeah.
And then he becomes a tiny little baby, and then he grows up. So then he becomes a Cohen. So even if he was a young kid, doesn't but we can only conjecture here, why he was not. The truth is, I've not seen anything on this. Why was Pinchas not considered? It's a decree min hashamayim. This is what Hashem said. Yeah. Anyway, okay. So now we understand why there's a bit of a break. Okay. Now, let's just discuss what we were discussing before. We said, these people, let's discuss what people were saying for the moment. People were saying very nasty things. They were trying to say that Pinchas was a very cruel kind of person, right? Now, and they were trying to, what's the word? They were trying to discredit his yichus, right? Who was his grandfather? Was Yisro. Now, okay, to say that he fattened up the animals before they were used to idolatry is one thing, but isn't idolatry worse? Isn't actually killing and isn't worshipping idols? Now, Yisro was the number one Stephen Hawkins of idolatry of old. He was the world expert. He was the doyen, yes, of idolatry. It says there was no idol that Yisro did not investigate and worship. He knew them all, every single one of them. So why are the people, the critics, what are they criticizing? They're criticizing that he fattened up calves. But okay, fattening up calves for idolatry is not nearly as bad as worshipping idols. Why doesn't it say Rashi says this whole thing, right? They were mocking him for being a grandson of Yisro who fattened up calves. But you should mock him for something a bit more serious. Mock him for saying, "Oh, your Zayda, he was a big idol worshipper, wasn't he? He was one of the worst idol worshippers in history." So why are they criticizing him for fattening up? Yeah, you understand that question? I'm going to give you a couple of questions. Why are they saying, question number 2, that why do we say that he was the grandson of Aaron, right? Why we in the end? What do we say at the end? At the end, what happened was the answer comes out that we actually say he's also the grandson of Aaron. This is like the answer. He's also the grandson of Aaron. Okay, but why don't you say he's the son of Elazar? Now, everybody, we know Elazar was a Cohen. Elazar was the son of Aaron. So why do you make a whole tzimus about Aaron? Yeah, that's question number 2. Yes? Question number 3, at the end, you know what it does? At the end, and it's not in this verse, but it's later on. What happens is they say, who is the person who died? His name was Zimri. Now, who is Zimri? Zimri was a Rosh Av, he was a leader of the tribe of Shimon. Okay? So, what Rashi says is, like this, Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aaron HaKohen, because the Torah gives a yichus, it says his name, and it gives a yichus, it uses genealogy after Aaron. So too with the bad guy, Zimri, we give him the, the appendage of yichus of Shimoni. But why is that? What's so terrible about that? In other words, you want to give praise to Pinchas because he's the grandson of Aaron, and you want to criticize Zimri, because he's a great grandson of Shimon. How is that a balancing, balancing out? What's that such a terrible thing for the bad guy, right? So, sorry. Okay. Yes. Okay. So now let's come to answer some of these questions. Here, the truth of the matter is, it's not so much about the crime of idolatry or not. What they were trying to say was, as what we mentioned before, that Pinchas was essentially a cruel, nasty person. I can't think of any other synonyms for cruel apart from nasty, but you get the idea, yeah? Cruel. He was cruel. What was he doing? He just went and just murdered somebody. Murder, right? It wasn't really called murder. From their point of view, a man, a woman, just killed them. Okay, so that's what they were trying to say, that it was about cruelty. Now, when you fatten calves, what are you doing to them? You're fattening them up, and then you're going to slaughter them. Well, that is a bit cruel, isn't it? Think about it. You're going to slaughter the animal anyway. Sometimes, you want to field something. People who they stuff geese, geese stuffing. There's a whole people that don't like it. Yes, they have cruelty to animals, right? Why? Because you're force feeding them. We're going to force feed them because you're going to slaughter them anyway, and you're going to sell the pâté de foie gras. Is that what? Yes, that is the right. So, that is cruelty. So you want to worship idols, worship idols. Okay, worship idols. But you're going to fatten these cows up. Well, you're going to force feed them, stuff them. So we're going to slaughter them. So you're feeding them what? You could not because you care about the cows. You're not feeding them to help the cows. You're feeding them because you want to have a nice fat cow for idolatry. That's cruel. That's cruel. You want to just slaughter an animal. You slaughter an animal. Okay, you slaughter an animal for your purpose of idolatry. But to fatten it up, that is inordinately cruel. So that's why they were trying to say, yeah, this guy is a cruel so-and-so. Very nasty. So therefore the Torah comes and says, no. You think he's cruel? He's not cruel. He's actually a kind person. Look at his grandfather. Who was his other grandfather? Aaron. Who's Aaron? Everybody knew Aaron was the Ish Shalom. He was the guy of peace. He was the guy of love. He was the guy who wanted to makar everybody. He wanted to treat everybody nicely and warmly and calmly and bring shalom to everybody, right? He is the ultimate of kindness, of goodness. He put himself on the line with the golden calf because he didn't want people to suffer, okay? He didn't want people to die. He was the ultimate kindness. So you know what? You want to try and say his Zayda. His Zayda was Yisro. But look at his other Zayda. You think he was cruel? No, his other Zayda was Aaron, who was kind. So what he did here was actually something kind, because he tried to save the Jewish people. And he did save the Jewish people. They were dying. So it was a kindness, although it did look a little bit, it looked rough. Yes, it looked sort of, how should you say, rather aggressive, right? But it was actually an act of kindness. Okay, and that's why we don't mention Elazar. Aaron was the Ish kindness. Now, Shimon, we said, well, why do we then talk about the bad guy that's descending from Shimon? Well, actually, Shimon also had a streak of cruelty, you might want to say. What was he known for, Shimon? Shimon Belevi Achim, right? What happened when it says when Shechem, remember Shechem? All the way back in Broshis with Dinah. Yes? Shechem took Shechem and Chamor, the whole town, and they took Dinah, right? So what does it say? The Chumash says, Vayikach Ish, a man and his brother came, and they went and they came and they slaughtered the whole town. Remember the whole thing? They got them to circumcise themselves. Yeah, they circumcised themselves. On the third day, they went and slaughtered the town. So who is that? Who was the main instigator there? It was Shimon. Now Levi, he went along with it, but he was the accomplice. But the accomplice, it's also bad, right? But it's not the guy. The accomplice doesn't do it on his own. On with him. But he doesn't do it on his own. So Shimon was the initiative. He was the initiative. And Yaakov cursed his anger that day. He was really angry, very upset with Shimon. Also, just another proof to this. So in other words, they're saying, this guy, Zimri, who is his grandfather? You want to say that he was cruel? He was cruel. The other guy was cruel. He was cruel because he didn't care about the Jewish people. He was trying to be kind, or people said, oh, he's a nice guy. He's trying to save his tribe. He's just trying to save his tribe, and therefore he's marrying this woman, making a point that he could save them. But ultimately, he was cruel because he caused the deaths of all these people with his plague. And he comes from Shimon, another cruel person. In fact, you remember when Yosef, when the brothers came to Yosef, and they didn't recognize him at first. So what did he do? What's the first thing he did? After he had a meal with them, right? He accused them of being spies, remember? He accused them of being spies. And then he said, right, he says, you're going to prove you're not going to spies? Go home and bring your brother. Because they said, we got one more brother at home. that was a whoopsie moment. They didn't mean to whoopsie. They revealed that they had another brother at home. So he sent them home, but he kept somebody there in prison, at least in front of them. Who did he separate from all the brothers? Shimon. Shimon, of all the brothers, he took Shimon because they realized he was the most dangerous. He was the most dangerous because if you let him go there, he's going to organize a war. This guy is total, he's like not scared of anyone. He's like Yoav, King David's general. Yes? So therefore he arrested him in front of them. I mean, afterwards he let them go, but at least in front of them he arrested them and separated because Shimon's the toughest of the tough. Yes? Okay. So here now we understand the claim of all the Shotim. And it just shows you that it's amazing how sometimes people do things that can get totally misinterpreted. Good people can do things that get misinterpreted. Bad people can do things that get misinterpreted. And they're looked at totally differently. What is the ultimate expression of hypocrisy? The Talmud says, what the ultimate expression of hypocrisy is? A guy who acts like Zimri, but he demands the reward of Pinchas. He acts like he acts like an animal, right? And he said he wants to be rewarded for it. He wants to be given a schar for it. This is the hypocrisy, right? Because, people, they saw what they did, but they misinterpreted. People saw what Zimri was doing, okay? And they thought, oh, he's doing a nice act. He's doing a nice act. He should be rewarded. He should be rewarded. We see this in contemporary society, don't we? We see criminals and people do crazy, stupid things, right? And they want to give they think they're doing everybody the greatest favor, right? And they don't express any remorse, okay? And then there are people who are the good guys who do certain things right? We just saw just now in New York. That's very interesting. There was in New York some guy who was in some grocery owner. He was attacked by some guy. It's all on video, right? It's on video. You see this guy, this black guy comes in and he starts attacking him and threatening him, right? He's robbing him. He had a knife, I don't know what, right? And he was threatening him. So this guy, somehow or other, he managed to get a knife and he stabbed him. He killed him, this guy.
Killed a black man.
Yeah. And they arrested him, right? And they charged him with murder, right? The left-wing DAs in New York, yes, and put him bail for $1 million, right? And this is the same guy who normally all the criminals can get out now. Now you don't have bail in New York. No bail. No bail. Never any bail. Anybody and everybody gets out. But he made a special case that the guy was defending himself. The guy's defending himself against the guy who was robbing him
With a knife.
with a knife and could have killed him, right? He puts him in prison. There's a whole outroar, and the mayor of New York, it's whole sentence. It's a whole something's going on. But you see how crazy the world sometimes is. Everything upside down, inside out. The good guys become the bad guys. The bad guys become the good guys. And it's like, as I always say, we're living in times like sometimes when the asylum has been taken over by the inmates.
Yes, it has.
The asylum is being run by the Mishigoyim. They make it like a revolution, and they took over, and that's the kind of world we're living in.
Yeah, we are.
We're living in a world where people, the Mamish Mishigoyim are the ones in power running the world. It's like it is literally an insane asylum. I mean, anyway. So here, this is the same idea, but you see, the Torah says, Hashem came and said, Pinchas, he's my man. He's a great guy. Save the Jewish people. Save the Jewish people. And that is why I'm going to give you that fantastic thing. Okay. Now, okay, let's just move on now to a totally different discussion.
So Aaron, Pinchas was what was his reward?
He became Kohen. He was, Hashem made him Kohen. That's a big reward. You can't, you see, like I made the joke before, you can't just become a Kohen. You just become a, if I want to be a Kohen, there's nothing else I can do. The Rebbe once told somebody in Pinchas, he was a Kohen. He was a Kohen. And he was going to marry, like somebody he couldn't marry. Maybe a ger or somebody. He was a Jewish person, right? And he was very, what's the word? He was very strong about it. You know, he loves her, he's going to marry her, that's it. Right? But if he becomes a Kohen, then of course his children will not be Kohanim anymore. Yes? Because you're not allowed to marry, so the children will not be involved. So the Rebbe said at one point to him, he turned to him and he said, you see all these books on the wall, all these books. He says, none of this helps me become a Kohen. He says, I don't have what you have. I can be the greatest scholar, it doesn't help me. What you have, you want to throw it away, just like that. It is so valuable, so precious, that only you could have it. No, nobody could become a Kohen. You can only be born a Kohen, right? You can become Jewish. Yes, you can convert, but you can't become a Kohen, right? So this was the only case in history where Hashem said, well, if Hashem says, then we don't argue. Because Hashem made the priesthood, you understand?
But a person could demote themselves.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. If you marry the wrong person,
Yeah.
they don't, funnily enough, you don't
So they
demote
don't
yourself.
so they don't have to get divorced.
They don't demote themselves.
They get demoted.
Well, their children get demoted.
Yeah.
Do you understand? It's interesting. I don't know if he would be able to do it. That's an interesting question. Would he be able? Would he get still? He's still technically a Kohen.
Yeah.
You can't lose. Let's say your Jewishness. People that try and convert. That's the meaning, right? It's meaningless. Yes. And you can't become a non-Kohen.
Well, is that?
But your children, if you marry the wrong person, then the children who are born from that will no longer be Kohen. So you can demote your children.
Yeah, but if he's married to somebody that's not, that he's not supposed to be married to, like
Yes.
let's say it could be just a
Okay.
frum person. He found out that he was a Cohen.
Yeah.
Which happens because they become frum. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So technically speaking, he
Made a mistake.
he made a mistake, but in order to stay married to this person or to be a kosher union,
Does he have to divorce her?
No, or does he have to take away his coinship or whatever?
Well, look, put it this way. Again, it relates primarily to children. If he wants children to be Kohanim, then he shouldn't have children with her.
Right. Okay.
That's all. It's a matter of that. Do the best and force him to get divorced? I'm not sure.
Right.
I'm not sure they force him because this is especially nowadays you can't force anybody to do anything. Yes, you can't force anybody to do anything. Right? You can only
become the opposite.
yeah. I mean, because this is a personal decision. Right? People will they will marry and they will choose what they want to do. Right? But they have to know there's a consequence there.
I thought you were going to tell us the story of the one who went to the Rebbe and the Rebbe said, go and talk to your mother. He hadn't talked to his mother for years.
Oh, found out he wasn't a
He was
Kohen after
adopted.
all.
Yeah.
Right. Yes, lots of stories.
Oh my
like that.
gosh.
That's right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That was more of a happy ending.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not always there.
Yeah.
But even this one, at least Pinchas was like,
Oh, that's a happy ending.
but he was part of that crowd anyway.
Well, he
Like,
wasn't.
He was no longer left out.
But he wasn't part of the crowd. He was and he wasn't.
I know.
Right. He wasn't part of the crowd. He could not offer up. He could not offer up
Because he
sacrifices
wasn't anointed.
because he wasn't
Yeah.
a Kohen. He wasn't. That's right.
At the
So,
beginning.
at the
but
beginning.
then he
But after
became-
this, of course, then he could offer up sacrifices. Be with the whole crowd.
He could be like his brothers.
Yes. He could be like his brothers and be like his parents and grandparents. Exactly. Yes. Okay. Now, we're running out of time. Da-da-dum-dum-dum-dum. We are running out of time. I wanted to just share with you a little something here. Look on page 1058. I'll try and hurry it up if I can. 1058, verse 15. Vaydaber Moshe Hashem le'emor. Yifkad Hashem Elokei Ruchos l'chol b'asar Yisrael. May Hashem should make a ruler over the Jewish people. Okay? He's going to come before them, go out before them, the whole thing, right? And then Hashem, what does he do? He tells him, you know what, Yeshua, here's your man. Okay? Here's your man. Okay, and then, okay, good. Now, go over the page, 1060. 1060, look at this. It's like the Hashem Moshe le'emor. Suddenly starts talking about the korbanos, by the way, which we say every single day. This thing, yes. Sabbath b'nei Yisrael. Oh, it's very good. You say the korbanos.
No, just this one. You have to. Women have to say just this one. Just the Talmud.
Yes. Okay.
We do the minimum, don't we?
Very good. Well, I'm impressed. So now, Rashi says on this verse, he says, fascinating thing. He says that what is written beforehand is the Parsha speaks about Moshe telling Hashem to appoint a new leader. Okay? And Rashi says, I'll tell you a Moshe. I'll give you a metaphor. He says it's like the daughter of a king, and she's about to, sadly, she's not well. I don't know if she's ill or whatever she's about to, they know her days are numbered. And what does she do? She comes to her husband, and says, could you make sure to look after the children? Make sure you look after the children. Yes, when I'm gone. Okay? Because the children are looking after. Okay? Now, so then the husband comes back and says to her, listen, my dear, darling, before you start telling me about the children, I should look after the children. Could you tell the children to look after me? Just tell the children to look after me. And that's why the juxtaposition that when Hashem said, Moshe is like the Moshe, he's a method. Moshe is the one who says, make sure there's a new leader amongst the Jews, right? Look after the children. Look after the children, yes. And then the next thing, that's the object of the metaphor. Then afterwards, it says what? It says Hashem says to him about the korbanos. So Hashem is saying to Moshe, that's like the husband saying, hey, listen, before you start telling me about leaders, and don't worry, we're going to take about leadership. Joshua is going to take over. But you tell the Jewish people about the korbanos. They have to offer the korbanos. Let them look after me. Right? Now, this metaphor is from the Midrash called Sifri. Now, in the Sifri, the truth is we have, in our book called the Sifri, which is a Midrash, we have it says something different. It says the metaphor is a king who has a wife of the king, right? And he's telling the wife of the king, right? But Rashi seems to have a different text. He doesn't say the wife of the king, the daughter of the king. The daughter of the king, and he's not married. Who's she married to? An ordinary guy. Why? Why does Rashi choose this text over the normal one that we have? That the metaphor would be of the wife of a king, she's dying, and the husband is a king. Because normally you'd think Hashem is the king. Usually it's Hashem is the king. You know what I'm saying? That is in most metaphors. Yes? But not in this metaphor. Okay? So the answer to this question is because there are three basic questions that we have that really are answered much better with the metaphor of the daughter of a king, in others a princess, yes, and the and her husband, who's like an ordinary guy. He's maybe a commoner. He's a commoner, right? So let's try and understand these questions. One question is, the question is, this is very strong language Moshe Rabbeinu is doing. Very strong language. Woo! You've coded Hashem l'kei ruchos. Or you up there, make sure, we got a leader. The Jews have a leader. That's very strong. That's very strong. How could that be so strong? The answer is because a wife normally, you see, of course, a wife, she does what her husband says. She is a very dutiful wife. Yes, she is a devoted and dedicated wife. It does the will of her husband, right? Now, here is a woman, she did this her whole life. But guess what? It's coming a time now when she's going to pass away, right? She's going to pass away. So now she comes out, she's at the end of the day, she's the daughter of the king. And her children are who? They're the heirs to the throne. So she's coming out and saying, listen here now, I've been a very good wife all these years. I haven't said a word. I've done whatever you want me to do, right? Now I'm telling you, look after the children. You better look after them. These are grandchildren of the king. They will be heirs to the throne. So you better look after them. Oh, that makes sense. More than saying it's the wife of the king. Because she's telling him, if it's the king doesn't need to be told, really, to look after his children. A king does not need to look after children. But here, the point is, because he's married to a commoner, he's right. He's a commoner. So she's saying to him, look, I know you're not part of the royal crowd, but please, you make sure these royal children look after them. Right? Now, then we have another question. How do we why is the idea of why does it make more sense to say that it's a common? In other words, when Hashem comes along and says, these two things, what are we asking for? We're asking for the husband is saying what? The husband is saying that they should. The wife is saying that she should look after the kids, and the husband is what? The husband is a commoner. He's a commoner. Do you know what? He's coming along and saying like this in the Moshel. In the Moshel, the king comes along and says, listen here, Hashem. Hashem says, before you command me about the kids, you command the kids about me. Now, here, think of it. This guy, the husband, he's not a king, is he? He's not a son of a king. He's a commoner guy. Well, when his wife dies, who's going to be in charge? I mean, who's he going to have? If the kids don't look after the father, who is the father going to have? Who is he going to have? His wife's going to pass away. He's a commoner. Who's going to look after him? Answer the question.
Hopefully it's his kids. Hopefully.
If they don't look after him.
Oh, if they don't.
If the kids don't look after him, who's he going to have?
No.
No one. No one. That's why he's saying, in other words, Pete, you've got to look after me because, these kids, they don't respect me. I'm a commoner. I'm not a king. I don't descend from a king, right? So therefore, you've got to tell them, before you start telling me to look after the kids, you tell them to respect me, to look after me, because they don't necessarily respect me. How does that work in the metaphor? The metaphor is that what? That Hashem, unfortunately, to a certain part of the Jewish people, they consider him like some, he's just some other guy. He's not the king. He's just, okay, he's God, but how many times have they caused problems, the Jewish people? They disrespected Hashem. They didn't treat him like Hashem. They didn't treat him right. And Hashem knows this from experience, from bitter experience. So he's like, comes to Moshe. Moshe, you're asking for a leader, very nice. But how about telling the Jewish people that I'm God, that they could, look after me, care with me, bring me my sacrifices? right? My sacrifices. And these sacrifices are very important to me. They're very important to me. They're crucial to me. Just like it's important for you that I should look after the kids, so too it's important for me that the kids should look after me and care about me. And that's what I want from you. And that's, please do that for me. And there's only,
That's quite brilliant.
it's brilliant. It's so profound. And that's why Rashi chooses this thing. And people understand that, okay, what about the sacrifices? Well, what about nowadays for us? We don't have sacrifices. What do we have? We have tefillah. We have davening. Okay, so some people think, what's the big deal if I don't daven? I don't shachar. So what? There's millions of people around. Everybody's davening. What's so terrible if I don't offer up a personal sacrifice of my daven? What's so terrible? Hashem says, no, don't you understand? It's like lachmi. It's my bread. It's my bread and butter. In English, we call it bread and butter, right? No, it's bread. It's my bread and butter. Your tefillahs to me. We have this close relationship. I want to have this close relationship with you. We're so close. Come on. Don't think it's insignificant. I need it. I need your tefillahs. And that's, don't think I don't need it. And that is the amazing message of this whole metaphor of how Hashem needs us. And he needs us to daven to him. And he needs us to offer up those korbanos, the sacrifices, so we can, because that relationship we have with him is so intimate, so special, so real. Anyway, I've slightly truncated it. I've gone over a little bit of time.
No, but you don't exactly, because I've never seen this translation. It says my food on my fires. I've never seen it translated my food.
Lachmi. It's korbani, lachmi.
I know, but
lechem is bread.
Yeah, but so he's saying that this is God's sustenance.
Yes, exactly. And you sort of think this bread and butter. It's not like, ice cream. You know what I mean? Ice cream or salad, fruit salad. You know what I mean? Cream on the cake. Lachmi, it's a staple of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Davening is Hashem's staple food. Okay, it's a crucial necessity. So people shouldn't think, okay, so I missed out on davening. I missed out on minyan. I missed out on Shabbat. There are plenty of people davening around the world. You need me? Another one? Hashem says, yes. I need the korbanos and the prayers are in place of the korbanos.
Interesting.
Okay.
I sometimes say to the kid, you were late for sure, how did you catch up? Oh, I sacrificed the korbanos.
Yeah, that's
They
the
say
old
that.
joke. I sacrifice. Yeah, they're the first ones to get sacrificed. Yes, the korbanos are the first ones to get sacrificed. Thank you for listening, ladies. And Ms. Hashem, we'll see you next time. Yes, okay. I assume there were no questions.
No, I want to ask you, your son does
Carlton.
gardening.
Be well. Bye-bye.
How would I reach him?